Hello everyone, welcome to EduTap. So in today's session, we are going to discuss a very important news article of finance that is regarding the inflation. So we will be understanding about the wholesale price index and the consumer price index. We will be understanding the news articles regarding the August 2022 data that has been recently released, as well as we will be understanding the static portion regarding the WPI and CPI. And why this is very important, because in NABARD Grade A in phase 1, direct question has been asked regarding the tolerance level of the inflation. Okay, and so the direct question can be asked on the WPI and CPI because the data has been recently released, and the static portion also we will do. So it is important for NABARD Grade A, RBI Grade B, SEBI Grade A. So please see it till the end so that you are able to understand the static portion as well as the current portion. Okay, so now before starting with the session, please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you are new to the channel, and join our Telegram channel for the PDF of this session, and you can get the link of the Telegram channel in the description box below. So now starting with the news article, that is the retail inflation has surged to 7% in August. So what you have to see is the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. This is the ministry under which the CPI, that is the Consumer Price Index based inflation data is released. Okay, and CPI based inflation data means that the retail inflation or the headline inflation, which we call. Okay, so the headline inflation or the retail inflation or the CPI based inflation is released by which ministry? This one. And which organization? The National Statistical Office, that is the NSO, under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, released the CPI based inflation data. Okay, so the National Statistical Office is releasing All India Consumer Price Index on base. Now you have to remember the base year, that is 2012. Okay, and the base is 100. Okay, the base of the index is taken as 100, and corresponding Consumer Food Price Index, that is CFPI, is also released by the NSO only. Okay, and it is released for rural area, for the urban area, and then for the whole of the country, that is the rural and urban area combined. So we will see all of this data, but I hope you have understood the ministry under which the data is released, the organization under which the data is released, and which data is released under these, that is the CPI based inflation or the retail inflation or the headline inflation. Now the India's retail inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index surged to 7% in August 2022 due to the higher food prices compared to the previous month. The data 6.71%. So the CPI data for the July 2022, it was 6.71%. That has been raised in August. This data is risen in August 2022 to 7%. Now, why this rise has been seen from July to August? That in July 2022, the retail inflation was 6.71%, and in August 2022, the retail inflation is 7%. So, this is majorly because of the food prices. So, food prices are rising very fast, and due to which the CPI inflation is rising. Okay, the retail inflation is rising. So, you can see that the CPI has risen to 7% in August 2022. The food index, now we will see. Now the food inflation in August 2022, it is 7.62%. So it is very high, especially the cereals. The cereals, that is very important for the people of the country because we consume cereals. Okay, it has risen. The inflation is 9.57% in the cereals. So you can see that in the food category, the inflation is rising very fast. Okay, so now when we enter 2022, from then onwards the inflation is rising, and you know that the tolerance limits of the RBI is 2% to 6%. That is, lower limit of the inflation should be 2% because inflation is important if it is a little inflation, because when prices rises, inflation means rising prices. So when the prices rises, the suppliers are motivated to produce because the prices are rising, so they are getting higher prices, so they will produce more. So that's why this is the lower limit, that at least this much of inflation, 2% of the inflation should remain in the country. But this is the upper limit, that the inflation should not rise above 6%. It will be harmful for the country. So this is the lower limit, this is the upper limit. The RBI wants the inflation to be around 4%, and minimum it can go to 2%, maximum it should go to 6%. But in 2022, from the starting of the 2022, we are seeing the inflation above the tolerance level. That it was in January, it was 6.01%, in Feb it was 6.07%, then in March, April it was highest 7.79% for the year, for the past 8 months. Then it came down in July from 7.01% to 6.71%, and in August it has again risen to 7%. Okay, so that is, the number has remained, the inflation, the retail inflation has remained above the Reserve Bank of India's comfort zone of 2 to 6% for the 8th consecutive month. Okay, so here you have understood that it has remained above the tolerance level, and that is harmful. And now we will see that this is the data that has been released by the NSO for the month of August 2022. We can compare this data with the data of August 2021 and July 2022. So from the previous month, the retail inflation, the CPI inflation was 6.71% and it has risen to 7%. Now if we compare it with the August 2021, the retail inflation in August 2021 was 5.30% and it has risen to 7% in August 2022. Okay, so in 1 year you can see that the inflation has risen from 5.30% to 7%. Okay. Now if we see that the CPI inflation is higher in rural areas as compared to the urban areas, because in the rural areas the consumer food price index is higher. So the food prices are very high in the agriculture in the rural areas, because those are the areas which depend on agriculture and which consume the agricultural products the most. And that's why when the food inflation is very high, so it affects the rural areas the most. Okay, and that's why in the urban areas you can see that the inflation is a little lower than in the rural areas, the retail inflation. Okay, so because the consumer food price index shows that in the rural areas it is 7.60% of the consumer food price index, or the food inflation. Food inflation is 7.60% in the rural areas, and that's why rural inflation in August 2022 is higher. So you have to consider this data and remember why this is happening. Okay, so now despite India restricting, now to control this food inflation, the monetary policy, of course the RBI has brought the repo rate. Okay, increasing the repo rate. The RBI has increased the repo rate by 50 basis point, that is, it has increased the repo rate to 5.40%. So that repo rate means what? That is the rate at which the RBI is giving loans to the banks. So the banks will get the loans from the RBI at higher rate because the repo rate has been increased. So the banks will give the loans to the consumers at higher rate. So when the consumers get the loan at higher rate, so they will not want to take much loan because the interest rate is very high. So I will not want to take the loans because I have to give more interest rate. Okay, so when people take less loans, that means they are demanding less products because the loans are taken to consume something, to have something. So the demand will decrease, and when the demand decreases, the inflation decreases. But here you can see that has not happened. Even though the RBI has increased the repo rate continuously, still the inflation has increased from the previous month. Okay, as well as this is what the RBI has done. Now what the government has done to control the food inflation, the government has restricted the export to a amount. So despite India restricting the wheat flour exports towards the end of August, the inflation touched 7% in August. So cereals means that wheat and such kind of jowar and bajra and all. So still the wheat prices rose and the inflation touched 7% in August, even though the government is trying to control the export so that the exports are not done much and the people of the country have more wheat with themselves, because the wheat is not being exported much now. But still the inflation rose to 7%. This may add pressure on the central bank to even more give a hike to the interest rate, even more raise the repo rate more aggressively in the coming months to control the elevated inflation. Okay, so the government has to take the step, the RBI has to take the step, the RBI has to increase the repo rate further so that the interest rate can be increased and the inflation can be controlled. Okay, so core inflation, now let's talk about the core inflation. Core inflation do not include the food and beverages. So it is not including the food inflation, as well as it is also not including the fuel and light. So it excludes the food and beverages and fuel and light, and so you can see that it showed the 5.9% of the inflation in August. So you can see that if we do not include the food inflation, the inflation is lower. Okay, it is 5.9%. So if we see the core inflation, it is lower than the total inflation or the total retail inflation. Thus remain below the tolerance limit. It is below 6% of the limit set by the RBI, and it is below for 4th consecutive month. For the 4th consecutive month, the core inflation is below the tolerance level of the RBI, and core inflation is what? Which do not include the food and beverages and the fuel and light. So now you will here, excessive July rains destroyed 8. Now why this happened? Okay, why this inflation happened? So excessive, see in July what happened, that the rains destroyed the crops in Maharashtra, and not only in Maharashtra, in northeast also there was shifting trend of the rainfall which affected the agriculture in a huge manner. So in July what happened, from July to August there was the agriculture that was getting affected, the agriculture that was getting very badly affected. Okay, so erratic monsoon was there, the rain was not there, due to which the farmers were affected, the agriculture was affected, and it is expected that the erratic monsoon pattern will continue for the coming months also. Across the country suggests there would be more crop damage that will happen, keeping food prices elevated in the coming months also. So in the coming months it is expected that the food inflation will further rise, and you can see that from July it was affecting, the crop damage was happening, the agriculture was getting affected, and due to which in August we saw that the food inflation was very high. Okay, as well as you know that the Russia-Ukraine war is going on, there is the supply chain disruptions that is happening due to the ongoing geopolitical factors. What is happening, that the sanctions are being imposed on Russia or Ukraine, the ban is there, the restrictions are there. So due to which the supply is getting affected, the supply chain disruptions are there, and due to which it is affecting the supply to our country also, due to which the prices are rising because the supply is getting affected. Okay, so hardening of commodity prices or the rising of the commodity prices, it is not from our country only, but for the whole of the globe, the prices or the inflation is very high. So now as I have told you that we will discuss the current, now we will discuss the static part also. So this is the WPI. The WPI index. See, the index is formed from many components. So WPI index is formed from 3 components. The first component is the primary articles, the necessary items. The second item is fuel and power, and the third item is the manufactured products. And the WPI, that is the wholesale price index, has given the highest weightage to the manufactured products. Okay, so under the WPI, the manufactured products has the highest weightage, that is nearly 64%. Now coming to the CPI inflation, the CPI, that is the consumer price index, this is formed from these components. Okay, that is the food and beverages have been given the highest weightage under the CPI, and that's why the food inflation affected the CPI in a very huge manner. Okay, because the food and beverages have been given 45, or nearly we can say 45.86, means 46% of the weightage is given to the food and beverages, and that's why the food inflation has a direct impact on the CPI. So now next is housing, that has been given 10%, the miscellaneous, that is the services, has been given 28% of the weightage in the CPI index. So you can see that the food inflation is high, the food and beverages have been given the highest weightage under the CPI, and that's why the CPI is showing a higher trend, we can say. The CPI based inflation data is released by which ministry? It is released by Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, and it is released by NSO, that is the National Statistical Office under this ministry. Okay, now coming to the WPI index, which of the following ministries releases the data? That is the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and this is the department for promotion of industry and internal trade under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, which releases the WPI index or the WPI data. Okay, that you have to remember. Now the WPI, here the WPI has given the primary articles, that is it includes the food, etc. It is given the lower weightage. So the higher weightage is given to manufactured products, and that's why here we will see that in July 2022 the WPI was 13.93%. Okay, the wholesale price index, the wholesale inflation was 13.93%, nearly 14%. But in August 2022, the WPI index or the wholesale price index or the wholesale inflation came down to 12.41%. So when the retail inflation is rising, the wholesale inflation is decreasing. The retail inflation is rising due to food prices, and the wholesale price index or the wholesale inflation is decreasing because here the manufactured products are given the most importance. It is given the most weightage, and the food inflation or the food prices are not given much weightage, and that's why here you can see that the wholesale inflation is decreasing if we compare it with the previous month. So the annual rate of inflation based on all India wholesale price index number is 12.41% for the month of August 2022, that is over August 2021. WPI based inflation was 13.93% in July 2022, so it has decreased. The WPI inflation has decreased. The WPI in August 2021. Now if we compare the August 2022 to August 2021, then we can say that the inflation, the wholesale inflation has risen from previous year. So in previous year it was only 11.64%, that has risen to 12.41%. Okay, so from previous year the wholesale inflation has increased, and that is because the inflation in August 2022 is primarily because of the rise in prices of mineral oils, the food articles, because food articles are under the primary articles. The crude oil, the crude petroleum, the natural gas, the basic metals, chemicals, chemical products, electricity, food products, all of these are rising. The prices are rising compared to the previous year. Okay, corresponding month of the previous year, that is, if we compare it with August 2021, the August 2022 data is higher because of these reasons. But still the data, if we compare it with the previous month, it is decreasing. The wholesale inflation is decreasing. Okay. Now you already know that the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade is the one that releases the data, and it is under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So now coming to the questions, these are the questions that I hope that you can easily answer. This is the first question, and this is the second question which you can easily answer. Okay. So thank you very much. These were the people that gave the right answer of the previous session question, that is Amit, Yash, Abhishek, Sandeepti, Neil, Prakash, Vardman Jain, Anirban and Suhas. Okay, so these were the people that gave the right answer of the previous session question. Axis Bank has partnered with Pay Nearby so that the rural areas can also get the services, okay, through the stores and all. So I hope if you are not seeing the previous session, do go and see that session also. That is also very important. So thank you very much. If you have any query, you can mail us here or you can contact us through this number. Thank you very much for replying. It is like boosting the confidence of the educator that is teaching when you reply, because it shows that okay, these people are understanding. That is really good to see. So thank you very much everyone.